announcements. We're going to have a great list and roundup of speakers for tonight, but I want to give you a little bit of background. I'm Libby Willis, and I'm with the Fort Worth League of Neighborhoods, and we're delighted you're here with us tonight. Some of you may have been with us 2 years ago when the League of Neighborhoods and the Fort Worth League of Women Voters jointly put on a series of 5 public information meetings regarding gas drilling. Those sessions were on a variety of topics, everything from eminent domain and recycling of water used in the drilling process to citizen response to drilling and other topics. We have continued our series since then on an occasional basis, and tonight the League of Neighborhoods presents a session on gas drilling and its environmental impacts.
Thank you for the invitation to come here tonight. I have a Subra company in New Iberia, Louisiana, and I provide technical assistance to community groups all over the United States and some foreign countries. I am a founding member of the Oil and Gas Accountability Project, which then combined with Earthworks. And I am on the board of Earthworks, and I am a technical advisor to the Texas Oil and Gas Accountability Project. And Sharon Wilson is here tonight, and as Libby told you, she has a copy of a document, and we also have electronically Drill Right, which overlooks an overview of the kind of technologies and the kind of requirements that should be included in a program that regulates drilling and production of oil and gas. So we're hearing a lot tonight about air. One of the things is in the Barnett Shale, air was sort of the first issue that was looked at. But water, contamination of water, and the waste issues are becoming more and more critical in the area. In addition, if you move out of the Barnett Shale area and you move up to the Haynesville Shale in Louisiana and the Marcellus Shale on the East Coast in New York, West Virginia, Ohio, you start seeing a lot of water issues up there because water is so critical to their survival. And all of a sudden, the past couple of weeks, air emission issues have become forefront in that area. So when we're hearing about the air, I'd like to tell you about some of the experiences we have and the kind of air issues that we have dealt with in the Barnett Shale. In the community of Dish, and Mayor Calvin Tillman is here tonight, there are 11 compressor stations. It's okay, it's not the right presentation. There are 11 compressor stations in a row, and those compressor stations are operated by 5 individual companies, and then there are gas metering stations as well, operated by 3 of those companies. Now, when you look at what's going on in Dish and what has been documented over the last couple of years, you look at those compressor stations and you see compressor engines, compressor blowdown, condensate tanks, storage tanks, truck loading racks, glycol dehydration units, which are associated with benzene, amine units, separators, and fugitive emission sources. And on visiting in Dish, the issues were that the people in Dish were being made very sick, and they thought it was associated with the natural gas compressor stations, as well as the drilling and production of gas wells in the jurisdiction of Dish. When we looked at what TCEQ required, they have a process called permit by rule. And that permit by rule allows for a facility to apply basically a one-pager, and they are allowed by rule to release 25 tons a year of all volatile organic compounds. And you heard the previous speakers talk about volatile organic compounds. They're also able to release 25 tons a year from sulfur dioxide, and then 250 tons of nitrogen oxide and 250 tons of carbon monoxide. There's one facility in the Dish area that has a compressor engine, a condensate tank, and a truck loading or unloading facility. And that facility releases 23 plus tons a year of volatile organics. So where does it come from, since there's only a compressor, a condensate tank, and a truck loading? Well, in fact, of that 23 tons, 22 tons of volatile organics are being released into the air by that one condensate tank. So there's a real effort underway to push to require that the condensate tanks have vapor recovery units. One, the companies will maintain their product, and 2, the citizens in the area will not have to breathe the toxic chemicals that are being released by the condensate tank. So in Dish, we did some sampling, as Calvin will tell you, that he spent a large portion of the community's revenue source, and Wolf Eagle provided the analysis and sampling, and we found 15 volatile organic chemicals in the air samples that exceeded Texas Environmental Commission's screening levels. Now, what TCEQ has done since then is raise the levels of the screening levels so that some of the chemicals won't now exceed, but at that time, 15 chemicals were in excess of TCEQ's screening levels. 10 chemicals were exceeded at one location. So this isn't just a benzene that has just a little bit over the level. 10 chemicals, 8 chemicals at another location, 5 chemicals at another, 3 chemicals in one. And the cumulative effects of all those chemicals over the level weren't even considered. But this is just how many chemicals exceed TCEQ's screening levels at each particular location that was sampled. So we start looking at those chemicals, and we see that some of them are as much as 10 times TCEQ's level, some of them as much as 100 times. Benzene was 55 times TCEQ's long-term level. So we're not talking just a little bit over, we're talking quite a bit over. And what do those chemicals cause as far as health impacts? Irritation to the eyes, skin, nose, throat, lungs, headache, dizziness, lightheadedness, nausea, vomiting, skin rashes, depression, anxiety, irritability, on, and then also chronic impacts, meaning long-term. And believe me, the people in Dish are being exposed to chronic exposure conditions. They live there day in and day out. The chronic includes nervous system impacts. We have Megan, who used to be a community member in Dish, that has a nervous system impacts. We have blood clotting abilities, we have mutagens, we have teratogens. So then we actually performed a health survey in Dish. So we're now moving away from monitoring the air to looking at what health impacts are being experienced by the community of Dish. And part of that health survey asked how many of the people were experiencing odor events. And in fact, 90% of the community in Dish reported experiencing odor events. And with those odor events, they received burning eyes, runny nose, sore throat, sinus, headache, asthma, nausea, indigestion. 71% of the community members, 71% had respiratory impacts. Remember, they live there day in and day out. And then there was a huge list of health impacts that the community members in Dish reported. And in fact, 61% of the health impacts that they reported were consistent with the health impacts associated with the chemicals that we were found when we did the air monitoring survey in Dish. It's an important issue that we have a cause and effect. We know the wind speed, we know the wind direction, we know that the wind was blowing from the compressor stations into the community when the samples of air were taken, and we know that the community reported odor events when the wind was blowing from the compressor stations into the community residential area, and they reported odor events and health impacts associated with those odor events. So then we went with a company called Precaro out of California, and we did monitoring for methane. Their instrumentation was designed to measure methane on an ongoing basis, so we drove up and down lots of roads, and we'd get a peak of methane, and we'd look out and we'd see, yes, there's a well, another peak, yes, there's a condensate, and then we did some sampling in Flower Mound and in Fort Worth, where we found high levels of methane, 40 parts per million, 50 parts per million, and the instrument spiked at that point. And again, when we got out and did a canister that correlated to the high concentrations of methane, we found the same chemicals in the community of Flower Mound and the community of Fort Worth that were associated back to these chemicals that were being released in Dish. And we found people with the same in the area that had comparable health impacts. So we have cause and effect. We have sources of emissions. We can trace it directly to the community. So when we look at the chemicals in Fort Worth and we look at the acute health impacts, in fact, the sampling in Fort Worth was done on Cleveland Gibbs Road. We have irritation to the skin, eyes, nose, mouth, and throat, headaches, dizziness, lightheadedness, nausea, vomiting, and the chronic health impacts: anemia, cancer, leukemia, post-teratogen, which is a developmental malfunction, damage to developing fetus, damage to liver, damage to kidneys. Earlier this week, Calvin testified at an EPA hearing, and he had performed some monitoring next to the continuous monitor that is being ongoing analysis in DISH. And in fact, he found concentrations using a canister over 24 hours that were much higher than what the continuous monitor that TCEQ had set up. So in that case, there's some issues about which one is calibrated correctly. I understand your quality control, quality assurance of the data that you talked about, and that it all came out very, very well. But there are also issues to look at. And when you look at the Mercer Ranch location that he talked about, had the highest benzene, had the benzene hit, it also had 31 volatile organic chemicals that were detected at that location. In addition, we had sulfur chemicals such as carbon disulfide, carbonyl sulfide, and hydrogen sulfide. Those chemicals, as well as a lot of the volatile organics, have short-term, very short-term impacts: respiratory problems, burning eyes, burning nose, headache, nausea, as well as the long-term chronic impacts. And just in closing, I'd like to give you an example of EPA has what's called Trace Atmospheric Gas Analyzer. It's Winnebago and a Bluebird camper with a mass spec inside. There are 2 in the United States. And when they leave their warehouse, one of them's housed in New Jersey, the industry immediately knows it's out of the warehouse and they trace it wherever it's gone in the United States. And we have had EPA use it at a lot of industrial sites. And so it comes into the industrial community, goes around on the residential roads, monitors at night because it has to go slowly. And the amazing thing is when the Tagger truck is performing its monitoring, the industrial facilities have little to no accidental releases and upsets, which usually release large quantities of the chemical the van is testing for. And when it leaves and a couple of days go by, the accidental releases increase back up to the normal level that we see on an ongoing basis. So in this case, referring to the earlier data that was discussed, there is the possibility that those facilities knew they were going to be monitored and could take preventive action or not do things that they know can result in high concentrations being released during the period of time when monitoring is going on. Thank you.